that was shot made contact. It looked very much, by the style and the circumstances, to be an organized crime hit.
How you doing, Jack?
The world of John Gotti, a man on top of it all. Mobster John Gotti, boss of the biggest and most powerful organized crime group in the nation, the Gambino family. Godfather John Gotti, the Dapper Don. For a time, a prince of New York City and beyond, with his hands in all of our pockets.
They control the meat markets, the fish markets, the garment industry, the trucking industry, construction and cement, narcotics, loan sharking, murder for hire.
His method was, if I don't like the guy, kill him.
You fellas, we can tell that you settle your mother in hell.
Well, John is one of the most beautiful human beings that I've met. He likes to have fun, he likes to go fishing, he loves boats.
He was a man that's loved by thousands and thousands of people. They all love him. Not only his neighborhood where he comes from, Queens, he's loved all over.
What's not to love? The man's having $7,000 dinner. Money, again, is no object.
The Gambino family, of course, is the most powerful family by far in New York and in the entire United States. John Gotti was therefore as close to a boss of bosses or a godfather as we could come in this time.
It is a multi-count indictment. It charges Mr. Gotti with 4 murders, a conspiracy to murder another person, obstruction of justice, loan sharking, illegal gambling, and tax evasion.
Yes, the government is framing John Gotti. Yes, it's been proven in 3 separate trials that he is not a criminal, that he is not a gangster, that he is not a racketeer, that he is not part of some Gambino family.
So far, I've been treated very nice by this man, Gotti.
John has been surrounded over the years by a lot of people who were cooperating with the government.
Sammy DeVoe, the stupid, you rat with the tail behind him. The tail that proves what kind of a rat he is. There's a man killed 19 people. He said that he got orders from John Gotti.
I think it significantly hurts the Gambino family. It's effectively taken out the number 1, number 2, and number 3 person in that organization.
My father is the last of the Mohegans. They don't make men like him anymore, and they never will.
Money, power, love. John Gotti had it all during his reign as boss of the underworld, but he was a twisted, perverted version of our American dream. Tonight we're going to tell you how John Gotti clawed and killed his way to the top, his triumphs and his failures, and how, like so many men who reach too high too fast, eventually he was betrayed by those closest to him. You'll meet his friends, his allies, and the men who fought him and toppled him from his throne. But oh, what a ride it was. Welcome to the world of the last Godfather. April 2nd, crime boss John Gotti was convicted of 5 murders, numerous counts of racketeering, loan sharking, and extortion. After a 7-week trial based on hundreds of hours of wiretap recordings and the damning testimony of a close ally, Gotti, the most powerful mobster of his day, was brought to his knees. Next month, he will hear his sentence. He faces life in prison, separated from all his power, his glory, and his money, much the way it all began for him. The man who would be king was born in New York City into total abject poverty, the 5th of 13 children. No mafia royalty in his background, His parents, John Sr. and Fanny, emigrated from Naples just in time for the Depression. John Sr. worked on construction crews. John Jr. was drawn to the streets. Joe DeChico is one of Gotti's associates and a lifelong friend.
Yeah, like I could say that I know of him when he was a kid. He was a wild kid like everybody else was. I was a wild kid too. He used to like to fight in the gym. He used to go to the ball games, sneak in, get in through the top, through the bottom. That was his life with all his kids that hanged out together.
It was the dawn of rock and roll, and in Brooklyn, where Gotti grew up, the heyday of the street gangs. Fox correspondent Pablo Guzman, who covers John Gotti and the mob, knows these streets well.
They called him Johnny Boy here in Brooklyn, and he breezed through school. He hardly ever attended. No yearbook photos or proms for Johnny Boy. He quit for good after the 8th grade at 14 to join a violent street gang, the Rockaway Boys, often at war here with black gangs like the Mau Mau Chaplains. But Gotti had bigger ambitions than that. He wanted to join the mob, Cosa Nostra. One of Gotti's idols, Albert Anastasia, feared Brooklyn boss of what would become the Gambino family. He was the dapper Don of his day. Anastasia, so ruthless and quick to kill, he was called the Mad Hatter by his own men. They rebelled. Anastasia was shot to death while he was getting his regularly scheduled haircut at Manhattan's Park Sheraton Hotel. The plot engineered by none other than his underboss, Carlo Gambino, a lesson for young Gotti.
The word treachery, I think you'll find Pablo running all through the history of La Cosa Nostra.
A walk through Little Italy, battleground for the mob, with Jules Bonavolanta, former chief of the FBI's organized crime section in New York.
Masseria, they kill him. Maranzano, they kill him. Anastasia, they kill him. Carlo Gambino played a big part in that murder. And Carlo succeeds, turns around and succeeds Al Anastasia as the boss of the Gambino family.
At 19, he apprenticed himself and his gang to Gambino Captain Carmine Fatico. The Gotti crew stole to order, and over the next 13 years, his arrest record shows burglary, forgery, truck hijacking, and there was jail time.
He was just a hijacker. I hate to say a two-bit hijacker. He was a hijacker. He was a thug.
John never feared nobody in his life. Nobody. I don't care who it was, small, big, or what. He was that kind of a kid. And that's why I always respect him, loved him, and talked to him.
He was a tough guy. He was a street guy with tremendous ambitions. He wasn't made until, I think, late in his 30s, 37 or 38, which is late, but not that late.
Getting made, being initiated into Cosa Nostra, our thing, was Gotti's great goal. One traditional requirement for membership, killing for the family, making one's bones.
John Gotti, to make his bones, committed murders for the Gambino crime family.
Gotti's first major hit, 1973. It resulted in a manslaughter rap and 2 years at Greenhaven Prison. The victim, shot to death, was James McBratney.
McBratney was accused of kidnapping Manny Gambino, the nephew of Carlo Gambino, for what we believe was extortion. And when you do that in mob circles, you don't live a long life. And certainly McBratney didn't live a long life after Gotti got a hold of him. He was made after he was released from Greenhaven, after the McBratney homicide, because he made his bones for Carlo Gambino.
In a secret ritual like this one, recorded for the first time by the FBI, John Gotti was made into Cosa Nostra. Agent in charge Milt Ulrich listens to the recording taped one night at this house in Medford, Massachusetts.
The initiate holds a burning picture of the family's patron saint in his hands, pricks his trigger finger, drawing blood. John Gotti was now a made man, ready to begin his murderous grab for power at the top, to become the Dapper Don.
John Gotti was a made man, no longer Johnny Boy. Now in Queens, he set up headquarters as capo or captain of his own crew here at the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club.
He was probably the hardest working capo in organized crime. He was setting up a crew that was vicious and brutal and would do the contract hit for the family.
And the family, now 1,500 men strong, and Gotti had a new boss. Carlo Gambino died of natural causes. His brother-in-law, Paul Castellano, took over.
Paul Castellano didn't have charisma. He was quiet, soft-spoken, and could easily get lost in a crowd.
His attorney, James LaRosa, recalls reviewing government wiretap tapes and learning more about his client.
You heard someone in a different world, obviously, giving orders. You heard him talking about the concrete industry and about control of the concrete industry. You heard him talk about contractors.
The aloof, somewhat distant Castellano also strengthened the family's grip on New York's garment industry, adding cost to clothing through monopolistic control of trucking, dictating the price for shipping goods. The Gambino trucking firm, Consolidated Carriers, has been imposed on garment center manufacturers for years.
The influence of the mob is something you grow up with. If I were to find myself really crossing somebody in the business that was violent, they wouldn't call me up and threaten me on the telephone. I'd find myself dead or hurt, because that is the rule of the jungle.
Gotti was a principal enforcer in that jungle. He was moving up, but in 1980, he suffered a tremendous personal blow. His favorite son, Frank, was riding a motorbike here near home when he was struck in a fluke traffic accident. The driver, Gotti's neighbor, John Favara. Frank Gotti, age 12, died instantly. His father was heartbroken.
I went to the wake. All the people, all the neighbors, the people that was there was unbelievable. And every one of them cried their eyes out. And this man took it very bad because he loved that kid to know him. Took it very bad.
John Favara fervently expressed his condolences, did everything he could to appease the Gottis. After months of mourning, Gotti took his wife Victoria to Florida for a rest. The next week, John Favara disappeared.
He was at a diner, and they snatched him and put him in a van, and he was never found. Some of the sources that had told us that he was dismembered, this neighbor of Gotti, and he was buried someplace in Queens. Several of my informants, one time or another, told me he was buried on the Cross Bay Boulevard going towards the Rockaway, and we had certain searches made for this body, but we never did come up with his parts of his body.
Gotti was questioned about Favara's disappearance, but charges were never brought. Meanwhile, Gotti and his crew were back to business, expanding into big-time dealing in narcotics, in violation of Boss Castellano's express edict. No drugs, under penalty of death.
Is any of this... Castellano was at the stage of his life where he had everything. He was the boss of the family. And drugs, when you look at drugs, it's dirty. You got mandatory sentences, heavy time. It brings down a lot of heat on you. So I think he just wanted to stay. He didn't need that.
The Gambino family thrives on discipline, chain of command from the capital and the soldiers. if they're allowed to deal in narcotics, you have divisions between crews, you have capos trying to compete against capos for drugs. It would totally destroy the family.
But during the early 80s, the Gotti crew ignored Castellano's edict. One man, Aniello Della Croce, known as Neil, averted a war between family boss Castellano and the rebellious Gotti faction.
Neil Della Croce was in effect John Gotti's mentor. John was with Neil, so to speak.
When you say with
him, I mean he was under him. Neil was the buffer between John and Paul Castellano. Neil was the underboss of the family. It was Neil who kept the crisis between John and Castellano from reaching fever pitch before it did.
But there were other dimensions to the growing split in the Gambino family.
I think enough people in the family, the captains and a lot of the key soldiers, were kind of fed up with the way Castellano was running things. He was making himself rich. A lot of the other people weren't earning as well.
On December 2nd, 1985, Aniello Della Croce, the man who kept Gotti and Castellano from each other's throats, died of cancer.
At that point, Gotti decided, his street smart said, you know, I know that Paulie's going to do something to me if I don't do something first.
December 16th, according to the trial testimony, Gotti made his move. He knew Castellano and his underboss, Tommy Bellotti, were scheduled to attend a Midtown dinner meeting at 5:30. John Gotti and his men, including a rising lieutenant, Salvatore Gravano, arrived early.
They all went to 46th Street. The shooters were dispersed on the street. They had Sal Scala, Eddie Lino, Vinio Tuso, and Johnny Caniglia right in front of Sparks. And of course we had John Gotti and Sammy Gravano across 3rd Avenue on 46th Street, watching from the corner.
The shooters were in place. Castellano and his attorney, James LaRosa, had just concluded a day in court.
We were ready to break for the Christmas vacation. He walked into the office unexpected with Mr. Bellotti, because it would have been the last time he would have been able to see my employees, and he wanted to give gifts to the girls for Christmas. He left about 3:30.
Then when Paul and Tommy showed up, they pulled in front of Sparks. The 4 shooters converged in the car, and I think they fired a total of 13 shots. It killed Paul and Tommy instantly.
I got a phone call from one of the columnists in one of the newspapers, and he said there's something coming over the wire now, and it's crazy, but I think maybe Paul Castellano's just been shot. I said, my God.
All the Christmas shoppers are out there. A lot of pedestrians, a lot of people coming back from work. And, the amazing thing about that is that nobody else got hit.
Police at the scene that night. No one in the crowd said they witnessed the execution. But 8 days later, a surveillance team outside the Ravenite Club, Gambino headquarters, photographed a Christmas party with an unusual twist.
They always had a Christmas party there. For as long as we know, obviously this was probably a more significant one. It was probably a show of strength for John with the number of people who were going to show up there. Kind of congratulate him. He wasn't the boss yet at that point, but he was the heir apparent, obviously. And, I mean, at that point, the world and the family sure as hell knew what happened and who did what.
In January, Gotti got his present from the family hierarchy. They named him boss. At 45, he had made it to the top. It would be a glamorous reign, but one filled with trouble and violence as well. John Gotti, now under the close scrutiny of the FBI with his ordination as new boss of the Gambino family in January 1986. Correspondent Pablo Guzman picks up the story.
The next 2 or 3 months, he fiercely tried to restructure the family, straight all the capos reporting directly to him, try to find out where all the money went, what industry, what unions they controlled, and just tried to consolidate his position as boss of the family.
Out in public, he showed another side of himself, although he never gave a single interview. He made himself known throughout the city as a godfather in the perfect Hollywood mold.
He made people love him, literally. He made the public fall in love with him. The guy was great. He was a master at it. People loved him. Neighborhoods loved him. The soldiers loved him. He kept everybody happy.
When Gotti heard that this Ozone Park Community Boxing Club was in financial trouble, he came to the rescue and helped raise money for a benefit.
He was a little upset because he thought it was a place where, you know, we had blacks and whites and greens and yellows. It was a melting pot. And this guy cared about this club. And he came and he supported it.
At night, Gotti was out on the town, hitting top Manhattan night spots, Maxine's, Sign of the Dove, and most often, Danoi, an Upper East Side restaurant owned by his close friend, Carlo Vaccarezza.
John, he loved to read. He liked to read Machiavelli, and he loves to portray himself as a winner. You know, he loved to dress well, he liked to read well, he liked to speak well.
John is a playboy. He's a real carouser. He's a party guy. He's a party animal. John's got his share of girlfriends. His wife never saw him. His family was the Gambino family, not his personal family. Every night he went out till 4 or 5 in the morning. You never got him out of bed before 12, 1 o'clock.
And Gotti has his quirks and other vices as well. He is afraid to fly, but willing to gamble, usually losing tremendous bets on a variety of sporting events.
Staggering. It's staggering. You just couldn't imagine the money. To John, the dollar didn't mean anything. It didn't matter if he had $100 in his pocket, he gambled 100. If he had 100,000, he was going to gamble 100,000. The dollar value wasn't there.
All the fun and games did not mean that the mob in New York City was at peace. One victim of a car bomb murder that has never been solved was Gotti's own underboss, Frank DeCicco. His uncle, Joe DeCicco, recalls the incident.
I'm the one who was there with him when it happened. And when that bomb went off, I ran to there and I almost burned my hands to the bed. And we were worried about the second explosion, and we picked him up and we went. I had him in my arms with blood from the top of my neck down. That the blood was just pouring out of him with his arm hanging, his leg hanging, and a hole in the back of his head, and the blood was just coming out.
That mob hit, as well as others, in addition to organized crime's penetration of businesses around the nation, was drawing increased attention in Washington, D.C. at FBI headquarters.
We have 24 La Cosa Nostra families spread out throughout the United States, from San Francisco to the East Coast, New York.
As Gambino family boss, Gotti became a national figure inside the mob. A power broker on the National Cosa Nostra Commission that rules on the action in Las Vegas and Atlantic City, turf disputes, and the division of spoils from their control of the big labor unions.
There's 4 major unions, as we see it, that they have control of. The International Brotherhood of Teamsters, the International Longshoremen's Association, the Hotel Restaurant Workers, and the Laborers International Union of North America. With their control of these major unions, they affect basically every citizen of the United States in different ways. Since 1981, we've been very successful in the way we're targeting and developing cases for prosecution.
Gotti was the target of some of those cases by federal and local law enforcement agencies, actually competing to see who would bring him down. Bruce Cutler was Gotti's attorney. Known for his aggressiveness, Cutler seems to have adopted more and more of Gotti's style with each successive case.
You didn't just vigorously represent John Gotti. You took an indictment in the first trial and threw it in the garbage can in front of the jury.
Pablo, I'm fighting for someone's life. And if that's what it takes to save someone's life and make a point, that's what I'm going to do. And I'm not ashamed of that. That's the only way to fight. You say you heard that on the tape, right?
Yes, sir.
Cutler Cutler in court during one of Gotti's trials. This one for allegedly ordering the shooting of a carpenters union leader.
Do you know what was in Mr. Gotti's mind when he said that?
Yes, sir.
You read his mind?
I think it's fairly obvious.
Do you know what's in his mind now, Investigator Wright?
No, sir.
Take a look at him and tell me what he's thinking about.
I wish I knew.
You deny that he's a major figure in organized crime?
Absolutely. I've denied that he was a figure in organized crime before, and I deny it now. I don't just do it to do it. It's just something I believe in.
There were successive acquittals for Gotti. After this one, his last, a celebration for the boys. But there was no jury trial for Gotti's men who violated family orders and protocol. There were 3 executions: Louis de Bono, Louis Melito, and Robert DiBernardo.
What happened the day of the conviction?
The FBI stepped up their war against Gotti. Here in their office in a remote corner of the city, the FBI Gambino Squad, codenamed C-16, intensified their assault. Informants told the agents that Gotti's most secret conversations were held in a hallway of family headquarters, the Ravenite Club on Mulberry Street, and in an apartment above the club, away from where Gotti thought bugs might be placed.
We knew that's where we were going to get our most significant conversations, because obviously they felt, John felt, and Sammy and Frankie Loke felt comfortable up there, that they used it enough. The problem, the downside to the apartment was we had a 75, 80-year-old lady who occupied it 24 hours a day, and it was a difficult chore to come up with a responsible way to get a bug in there and not disturb her and her lifestyle.
The agents waited for months until they could plant their listening devices. The FBI declined to discuss the specifics, but surveillance expert Frank Jones explains what type of bugs were used.
This device here is a radio transmitter with a contact microphone. That this microphone could be placed on a window, a wall, and then simply plugged into the transmitter, and it's capable of transmitting it half a mile, maybe more, to a receiver, which could then be listened to by the agents and or recorded. It's possible to hide a radio transmitter inside anything. Perrier bottles, in clocks, in walls, in teddy bears, in, I mean, you name it.
From their surveillance post 3 blocks away, FBI agents used sophisticated cameras to film Gotti and his men no matter what the hour, to put faces with the conversations being recorded.
This particular camera here is a video camera that has been specially modified with a long-range surveillance lens and a night vision scope with infrared illuminator.
Gotti and his men walked and talked, seemingly unaware their security had been penetrated. The boss and his top men, Frank Locascio and Sammy Gravano, all of whom had taken a vow of silence, omerta, literally blabbed their way into prison on December 11th, 1990.
Last night, federal FBI agents and New York police detectives arrested the leadership of the Gambino crime family.
Gotti, Gravano, and Locascio would spend the next 11 months awaiting trial together on the same cell block in a downtown Manhattan prison. Gotti remained confident. He had lawyer Bruce Cutler in his corner, and none of his top lieutenants would testify against him. After all, they were sitting right next to him in prison. But Gotti was in for 2 big surprises.
You know, Frankie, I don't like you. I love you. I don't like you. I love you.
Gotti and his underbosses, Frank Locascio and Sammy the Bull Gravano, were in prison for nearly a year, conferring about their upcoming trial. One morning, Gotti woke up to find Sammy Gravano missing from the cell block.
It was an astounding turnabout, if you will,
when John Gotti found that this man had left the prison and had now become a government witness. And when the chips were down, he wasn't what he projected himself to be, a tough guy. He wasn't at all. He couldn't take jail. He was crying on the phone.
I don't think Sammy was really too keen on the idea of spending the rest of his life in jail. I'm certain that he had listened for 11 months to John talking about his defense, his defense, his defense. He figured, I'm going to get him before he gets me.
He had me fooled for all these years. He's seen 100 years in front of his eyes for all the murders he done, and he wants to bury the man and say, the man gave him orders to do it. That means John Gotti I'm talking about.
Gotti's second big surprise came fast. Prosecutors persuaded the court that Gotti's longtime attorney, Bruce Cutler, be disqualified from representing him. The ruling, Cutler had violated the traditional arm's-length relationship between attorney and client, that Cutler was house counsel to the mob.
I've done nothing wrong, committed no crimes. But what I did do, that the government doesn't like, is I didn't lay down for the government. I fought the good fight vigorously on behalf of John Gotti each and every day.
There are some people in law enforcement who feel that you crossed some imaginary line in defending John Gotti.
I know one thing. Did nothing wrong, committed no crimes. But you can't represent somebody, Pablo, who's facing the rest of his life in jail on 3 separate occasions. You just go to court at 10 o'clock, leave at 5 o'clock, say, I'll see you tomorrow. You gotta live that man. You gotta be inside that man. How would you represent that man without having that closeness? So I don't apologize for that.
No matter the arguments, Gotti lost his attorney. There was trouble on the home front as well. Gotti had designated his son, John Jr., still in his 20s, as a capo in the family.
He would summon all the capos down to the Bergnet Fish Club Saturday afternoons, and here's a young kid lecturing some 40-year veteran of the LCN as to how he should run his crew, and how the old capos didn't like that too well.
Perhaps the term that's most often used to describe John Gotti Jr. is arrogant and incapable. And that may be why the others distrust him and dislike him so much.
At a funeral for a slain mobster last year,
You really kind of saw what John Gotti Jr. thought he was at that time. I mean, here's a guy who demanded respect of everybody around him. He shows up at this funeral with all his little punks. Everybody has to wait for him to go in, for him to come out. I mean, here these people are at Bobby Borriello's funeral, and he's the main attraction. It's just something not right there.
with the leadership of the Gambino family in question, and Gotti himself held without bail for more than a year, the murder and racketeering trial began last January. It was a main event, unprecedented security, jurors totally sequestered with their identities never released, all drawing nationwide attention.
It was a life and death struggle for the prosecution because they had to win the case. It was their life or death. And it was a life and death struggle for the defendants because if they lose, they never get out of jail. So you couldn't have stakes any higher than that.
Celebrities turned out in force.
Do you know John Gotti? Yes, I do. What do you think of him?
I keep that opinion to myself.
And grandpa of the TV classic, The Munsters.
Two of my friends are on trial, John Gotti and Frank Locascio. And you know what friends are for? To support you when you're in trouble.
I'm interested in the drama, the human drama of is facing a friend whom he grew up with, and suddenly hearing all this thing that the friend is saying, Sam is saying about him.
Sammy the Bull Gravano, Gotti's chief lieutenant.
If he was in the street today and I was face to face with him, I would kill him in 2 seconds and go right to the courts and say, hey, I done it.
Along with the surveillance recordings, Gravano's testimony against Gotti and Locascio was the cornerstone of the prosecution team's case, in return for delivering chilling first-hand accounts of the murder of Castellano and others, including many he committed on his own. The prosecution promised Gravano a lighter sentence and later a new life in the Witness Protection Program.
Gravano admitted before a judge that he had committed 19 murders. His cards were out on the table.
He came out with the story himself and admitted that he killed his brother-in-law. He killed that kid. He chopped him up in pieces. And how the family found out about it, the dog went into the kitchen with the kid's hand in his mouth. And that's how they knew that the kid was dead. Nobody knew where he was until that happened.
For the defense, in Bruce Cutler's absence, a team led by Albert Krieger.
Our country is sick to the core if it is willing to pay for testimony by literally absolving a person of 19 confessed murders.
The murders that were the part of this indictment were Gravano's murders, no one else's. And that was clear from the evidence that ultimately came out.
To say that Gotti was not responsible for some of these murders is to say that Hitler was not responsible for certain Nazi atrocities.
After 36 days of arguments, witnesses, and evidence, the jury retired to deliberate.
They weren't supposed to go out for lunch that day. They ordered pizza pies. They didn't even have a chance to take a bite of the pizza. They sent the letter out that they reached the verdict.
It took the jury less than 2 days to return the verdict that could put John Gotti...
Got a verdict. John Gotti has been found guilty of all of the charges against him.
The end of the reign of John Gotti.
Prosecutors say it was Sammy the Bull Gravano's testimony that sealed John Gotti's fate.
Gotti, guilty on 13 counts, including the murder of his predecessor, Paul Castellano. Along with underboss Frank Locascio, Gotti was finished.
He stood there with dignity. He took the defeat with a certain courage, and I think he took the defeat very well.
You ever see a man get up from that table after getting found guilty in an hour and a half? In 1 hour and a half of a verdict. Got up like a gentleman and said goodnight to the rest of the people, said goodnight to the media, said goodnight to the jury, and told the judge, thank you, and walked out. Would you ever see a man like that?
It's been a long road. Justice has been served.
The prosecution team, led by U.S. Attorney Andrew Maloney, announced the end of Gotti's reign.
Today, another milestone in the fight against organized crime. The Teflon is gone, the Don is covered with Velcro, and every charge in the indictment stuck. The mob, as we have known it in New York City and in the United States, is on the way out.
With Gotti convicted and further prosecutions planned against the mob, the Gambino family and others across the nation are severely wounded and scrambling to regroup. But other organizations, just as deadly, are poised to take over some of their rackets.
On June 23rd, John Gotti is scheduled to be sentenced on his murder and racketeering conviction. Still, he remains cocky. He believes he will maintain his control of the Gambino family.
He's still the boss. He hasn't stepped down. Yeah. He hasn't been killed, so... That's a good point. He's convicted, but he's still the boss. He plans to run the family from jail, wherever they may be. So his reign's not over with.
I believe that John Gotti's nature is such that he will not want to give up the reins of power to the Gambino family. I'm also convinced that the other mob leaders, the other capos, will decide John cannot go on the rest of his life running the Gambino family from within jail.
After Gotti, who will be the boss? There's no obvious heir apparent. The top 4 leaders are in jail or dead. Other candidates include Giuseppe Arcuri, but at 78, he may be too old. James Jimmy Brown Failla, but at 73, also getting on in years. John Gotti Jr., but he's almost universally disliked. Danny Marino, 51, is a likely candidate, but as this casino security video shows, he may be unable to keep his emotions under control. None have the vitality, the charisma of John Gotti.
The largest organized crime family in New York, the Gambino family, has been substantially hurt by this case. I'd say right now we're averaging about a little over 200 mob figures convicted a year. That's what's going on, and across the nation in some cities we've definitely hurt the families.
Get down! Get down! It's a gun! They got a gun! Get a gun! Start firing!
But there are other criminal gangs with ever-growing membership and influence across the nation, anxious to take the place of Cosa Nostra.
Groups like the Chinese groups, the Green Dragons, the Vietnamese groups such as Born to Kill, the Jamaican Posse. These are individual groups that have sprung up in the last 5 to 10 years, dealing primarily in the area of murder, extortion, and narcotics, especially narcotics. And I believe they will look at this as perhaps an opportunity to seize some of the territory, some of the potential wealth and power that the mob has controlled for these many years.
The new gangs are a problem. They're violent gangs. They're very intimidating gangs. They're heavy into narcotics. Their rules are completely different than Cosa Nostra.
They're not involved in labor racketeering, they're not involved in sports gambling, loan sharking, etc. They're more involved in narcotics, they're low local protection rackets. So I can't possibly see them being a threat to the control of the Gambino family. Is there any infringement in their territory?
The Gambino family will continue to run it. Whether the replacement will be as dynamic as Gotti or obtain the myth as Gotti, we don't know.
We intend to keep up the attack, but organized crime is a little bit like a vampire. You have to make sure you put a stake through their heart.
In fact, it was business as usual at Gambino family headquarters just a few weeks ago, but business without John Gotti. Still, his legal team and his friends have vowed to fight on with appeals for his release.
What we're doing now is isolating the issues and preparing to present a very compelling argument to the Second Circuit as to why there should be a reversal and new trial in this case.
This man never had a chance to defend himself in this case. I never heard of this in my life where you could take away a man's right to have his own freedom, his own lawyers. They got rid of them. You know who they are. Those Scotland One.
Appeals notwithstanding, in all probability, John Gotti will be sentenced to life in prison and will never know freedom again.
I'll try everything in the world to get permission to go see him. And I will go see him as much as I could as long as I'm alive. That's what I think about the man. And believe me, my kids and my wife, and they would do the same. And I know every one of his friends would try to do the same thing. He'll never be alone.
John Gotti's reign as boss, however spectacular, was brief, not even 6 years long.
I think he was trying to grow into the job as boss. He wanted to be bigger than life. I just don't think he ever got the time.
I think he's probably spent the least amount of time enjoying his title. He's lived well while he's been out on the street. But
he had a good run.
Yeah, but that's about it.
I believe there may never be another single individual with the power, with the reputation that John Gotti had as head of the Gambinos.
Well, I think without a doubt, he's going to be the last Godfather.
No question, John Gotti was a man of great style, a leader in his field, if you will. But that field was murder, extortion, racketeering, and narcotics.